Although things have very much moved on since last September, I think it's worth putting where we are today in context. It started pre-independence referendum with the vow that was made, and then with a post-referendum commitment of what Scotland could expect to happen next. That resulted in the committee being set up cross-party to look at devolution and further powers, and then with a very firm remit to study the draft clauses coming from Westminster, from the then government, in relation to the Smith Commission report, the Smith Agreement, upon which some in this chamber served on that Smith Commission. I think what's become very, very clear, and certainly has come out cross-party in the report that has been done by the committee, is that in fact the draft clauses that came from the Westminster government do not match either the spirit or the substance of the Smith report. And I think it's very, very telling and excellent that it is in fact cross-party agreement that this is not the case. By the nature of these events that I've outlined in the timescale, I would say there are issues to be further discussed to ensure that that Smith Agreement is delivered both in spirit and substance, and indeed that there is a coherence in the legislation which results from the Smith Commission. The Secretary of State for Scotland agreed with that point the other day when we met with him, I'm pleased to say. But I'd also like to be very clear about something else. We're talking here about intent. The spirit and substance of the Smith Agreement, which came from the intent of the Smith Commission, following on from commitments made. So it's about intent. It's not about interpretation. You cannot say that the Smith Agreement is there to be interpreted and that the draft clauses may in some way actually interpret it in one way, while perhaps I myself would interpret it in another. It's not that simple. To talk of interpretation is to belittle the commitments made. It's to belittle the cross-party work of my Smith Commission colleagues and the cross-party work of my colleagues in the Devolution and Further Powers Committee, not to mention the excellent contribution of advisers and witnesses. So I can't emphasise enough that the committee, cross-party, overall, noted spirit and substance. And I would add to that clearly intent, not interpretation. There's a couple of things I'd like to particularly focus on, and I know my colleagues will focus on other things. The permanency of the Scottish Parliament, that was a big thing, both in the vow and post-referendum commitments. There was a lot of talk about this at the Smith Commission, and there was also a lot of talk about it at the committee. Certainly in the draft clause that has come up, provides that the Parliament and Government will be recognised as permanent. I don't see that there is any purpose, and I'm not sure what the expected effect is of adding these words. It's not at all clear, and I would think removing them would move the provision much closer to the Smith recommendation. And that's the view of the committee. And if we were to weaken the effect of that clause, it would be unfortunate, given that all-party agreement to the recommendation, and indeed the views expressed to us by the then Secretary of State for Scotland, that the permanence of the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government is in fact guaranteed. So, we consider that the effect of the clause in permanency as currently drafted is declaratory and political rather than legal in effect. So we would recommend that, should there ever be any thought of a future UK government deciding that the Scottish Parliament was no longer required, this would have to be tested in a referendum of the people of Scotland, with majorities also being required in the Scottish Parliament and indeed in the UK Parliament, because the Smith Agreement said clearly that nothing within any settlement precludes the sovereignty of the Scottish people. And this has been noted many times related to that. Devolution is a process, not an event. It was interesting when Lord Smith came up before the committee, he said, if you know a way of making the institution permanent, tell me, because that is the Scottish people's will. And I think we should bear that in mind at all times when we are talking about any legislation in respect of the powers to Scotland. I'm looking at the time. There's always a worry that you don't have enough to say, and then you start and you feel you could say so much more. I would also very much like to have talked at greater length about the Sewell Convention, because again the committee was concerned that there was not enough emphasis being given to making sure that the UK Parliament could not, in fact, legislate against the will of the Scottish Parliament. I hope that the Secretary of State and his colleagues will look at that much more closely and redraft the clause before it is presented again to the UK Parliament. Very quickly, Presiding Officer, what underpins so much of all of this is intergovernmental relations and indeed inter-parliament relations as a subset of that. And I would hope that all concerned in trying to smooth the way for this, obtain additional powers for Scotland and coherence in that settlement, will bear in mind that it must be underpinned by respect on all sides. Thank you very much.
Many thanks.